The night Edren nearly died, no one thought to look for the cause. He was 8 years old, already possessed of the kind of stubbornness that would one day exhaust every advisor he would ever appoint. The fever had come fast. Between the midday meal and the evening bells, he had gone from chasing stable hands through the east corridor to lying flat against sweat-soaked sheets, his skin burning, his breathing labored and wrong. The palace healers came in turns, pressed cool cloths to his forehead, and spoke in low voices they believed he could not hear. "The wolf isn't responding," one of them murmured near the window. "In a child his age, that's, you will find a way," said his father from the doorway, in the flat tone of a man holding himself together by will alone. The wolf was the worst of it. Even at 8, Edren understood what he was meant to become. And in every ordinary day before this one, he had felt it. A low hum beneath his ribs, warm and certain as a second heartbeat. Now it was barely there. A thread pulled almost to nothing. He lay still and listened to the palace breathe around him and tried not to think about what it would mean if the thread broke entirely. Outside the walls, autumn had already stripped the trees bare. She was not supposed to be there. Nell's mother had clear rules about where a 7-year-old was permitted to wait, and outside the walls of a royal palace after dark was not among them. But the bench near the east gate was dry, and Nell had been sitting for over 2 hours, and her feet ached, and the flagstones here were smooth enough to draw on with chalk. She drew horses, then something with too many legs that she decided was a spider, and rubbed out at once. The evening bells rang from somewhere above her. She hummed without thinking. It was the song her mother used at the close of every service, the one that was supposed to help, though Nell was still too young to understand help in what precise sense. Her mother never explained it plainly. "You'll understand when it matters," she always said, which was the kind of answer that told a child nothing and somehow told her everything at once. Nell hummed and drew badly and waited. Inside the palace, a small boy's fever broke before midnight. The healers called it a mercy. His father stood at the window until dawn. No one thought to ask about the girl sitting outside the east gate, humming to herself in the cold. No one thought to connect the two things at all. The road into Dunmore was thick with mourners. Nell had arrived the evening before, ahead of the procession, and taken a room at the only inn still renting. Every other bed in the village had been claimed by lords and their retinues for the occasion. The innkeeper had looked at her worn travel bag, her plain wool coat, and the conspicuous absence of any attendants, and priced the room accordingly. She paid without argument. She had long since stopped being surprised by how little space the world offered a woman traveling alone. Her mother had died 2 winters past. A fever, unremarkable and thorough. Nell had buried her in a field outside a village she could no longer name, sung the closing rites alone over a grave dug by strangers, paid with the last coin she had. Then she had kept moving, because moving was what she knew. 30 years her mother had traveled these roads, and Nell had inherited the work and the rhythm of it, and very little else. The arrangement had reached her the way arrangements always did, through a third party, payment deposited at the inn before her arrival, a sealed note with plain instructions, and a name she did not recognize. Not the king's name. Someone else. The note said to come to the cemetery after the crowd had gone, to sing the closing rites over the royal grave. It was an unusual request. Families who could afford to bury their dead with full ceremony rarely wanted the final prayers delivered in private. But she had been paid well, and she had learned to stop asking questions whose answers would only slow her down. The funeral itself, she watched from the tree line above the cemetery, standing well back while the procession wound through the village below. The Alpha King's casket moved on the shoulders of 8 men in dark wool, followed by lords, court officials, and soldiers with their fists pressed flat against their chests. The village had gone quiet the way places did when something enormous had passed through. Not silent, exactly, but hollowed. Nell watched and read faces out of habit. Her mother had taught her that. Know the room before you walk into it. One soldier near the rear of the procession stood slightly apart from the others. His posture was correct, his expression suitably grave. But his eyes moved too deliberately, scanning, cataloging, settling nowhere too long. That was not grief. That was surveillance. She noted him and waited for the crowd to clear. By the time she descended to the cemetery, the last torches had been carried back toward the village. The royal grave sat in the center of the plot, earth still dark from recent turning, no proper marker yet, only a carved wooden post with the name pressed shallow into the grain. The night smelled of frost and cold soil and the thin trace of candle smoke left behind by the ceremony. Nell set her bag at the edge of the path and stood still. She always did this. A moment of quiet before beginning, listening for whatever was present. Her mother had called it courtesy. Nell had come to think of it as something more practical. The silence told her things other instruments could not. Tonight, it told her the grave was empty. Not empty of a body, necessarily. She had no way to know that for certain. But empty in the way she understood. No weight beneath the ground, no pull, no presence waiting to be guided anywhere. When she sang over a true grave, there was always something there. A resistance, like moving through standing water rather than air. Here, there was nothing. The earth gave nothing back. She considered simply leaving. She had been paid regardless. Instead, she drew her shawl tighter and began. If someone had arranged for her to stand here, they had a reason. She intended to find out what it was. Her voice rose into the stillness, low at first, following the path of the closing rite. The melody carried no words in any language she could name. Her mother had always claimed it was older than language, which Nell had spent years deciding was either genuinely true or complete invention. Either way, it worked. The earth moved. Not at the carved post. A few paces to the left, in a stretch of ground that looked undisturbed, a tremor ran through the soil, and the surface cracked, and a hand broke through, fingers spread, clawing forward, and then a second hand, and then a man dragged himself out of the ground with the raw desperation of someone who had spent the last of everything on a single motion. He was broad-shouldered and pale as ash, his clothing packed with dark soil, and he was shaking in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. He raised his head. His eyes found her with an urgency that made her take one step back. "Gorvin!" he rasped, the word torn from a throat that had been breathing dirt. Then his arms gave out, and he went face down onto the grave soil and did not move again. Nell stood very still. She looked at the man on the ground. She looked at the wooden post with its shallow name. She looked at the tree line, and then at the shadows between the standing stones. And then she said, calmly, into the dark, "You can come out." A pause. Then the soldier she had noted, the one with the careful eyes, stepped away from the far wall. He moved through the darkness as though he had no need of torchlight, his steps quiet and unhurried and certain in the way of someone whose senses did not require what others depended on. Up close, he was taller than the distance had suggested. Dark hair, a close-trimmed beard, and the kind of stillness that was not peace, but discipline. The deliberate containing of something larger than the surface showed. His eyes caught the faint starlight and held it. Amber, warm and sharp at the same time. He looked at the man collapsed on the ground, then at her. "You didn't run," he said. "I noticed." She kept her shawl pulled close. "Who is he?" A man who asked for more than he was owed. He crouched and pressed 2 fingers against the man's throat. "He'll live, because of what I did." "Yes." She studied the man in front of her, the soil on his hands, the careful tension he was holding behind his expression, the grave with his name on the post, standing a few paces away, and no one in it. "You're not dead," she said. "No, and you arranged for me to be here." He met her eyes and did not look away, and did not apologize. "I needed to know if what I'd heard was true," he said. "And now you know. Now I know." Nell bent and picked up her bag. Above them, the sky was an unbroken stretch of cold stars. From somewhere in the village, a dog was barking at something it had no name for. "Then we should speak somewhere that isn't a graveyard," she said. He stood. The amber eyes held something she could not read yet, not relief, not triumph. Something more careful than either of those things. Yes, they moved Hadrick to the inn's back room before first light. He was conscious by the time they got him upstairs, which was more than Nell had expected from a man who had been breathing soil 20 minutes prior. He sat against the wall with his knees drawn up and his hands shaking around a cup of water. and he looked at Edrin with the expression of someone who had prepared a great many things to say and was now reconsidering all of them. Edrin gave him no opening. He pulled the room's single chair away from the wall, reversed it, and sat with his arms folded across the back of it and waited. Beric stood at the door. Nell stayed near the window because no one had told her to leave, and she intended to hear whatever came next. "You should be dead," Hadric said finally. "Many people should be many things," Edrin said. "Tell me about Gorvin." It took less than an hour. Hadric was not a brave man, that much was evident. But he was a frightened one, and frightened men with nothing left to protect spoke with remarkable clarity. He laid it out plainly. Gorvin had approached him 6 months prior with an offer structured to sound like an invitation. The compound was sourced through a merchant contact 3 territories removed. The plan had always been the staged death, the false funeral, the vacuum of authority that would follow. And into that vacuum, Gorvin's chosen successor. Hadric had been well paid. Then he had made the mistake of asking for more. "He had me taken in the night," Hadric said, his voice still rough from disuse. "His men drugged the wine. I woke underground." He looked at his own hands. "I did not expect to wake at all." "And the successor," Edrin said. "Who?" Hadric named a lord from the Western Territories. Edrin's expression did not change. Nell, watching from the window, noted the slight tightening around his jaw that suggested the name was not a surprise, but was still unwelcome. "I'll testify," Hadric said, "before whatever court you convene, in exchange for exile, clean, with no pursuit." Edrin was quiet for a moment. "Beric will escort you north by the back roads. You'll be kept somewhere safe and unpleasant until you're needed." He stood. "If you run, I'll find you." Hadric nodded with the resignation of a man who had accepted that his options had narrowed to a single corridor. Beric stepped away from the door and crossed the room to grip Edrin's arm briefly. A private thing, the exchange between 2 people who had trusted each other long enough for gestures to carry more than words. Then he turned to organize the departure, and Nell was left standing near the window while Edrin turned to look at her with the expression of a man who had been putting off a conversation and had run out of road to put it off on. "We should talk," he said. "We should," she agreed. "You can start with why you arranged for me to be at that cemetery." They talked in the narrow corridor outside the room, voices low, while the inn finished its own quiet business of the pre-dawn hours. Edrin told her about the poison, how it had arrived in his food over a period of weeks, too gradual for the first symptoms to mean anything alarming, until the shift began to fail. He described it plainly, without self-pity, the way someone described a mechanical problem they had not yet solved. The wolf was still present, but it was like trying to breathe through cloth. The instinct was there, and the capacity was diminishing, and without the shift, an Alpha King was an authority on paper, which was to say, not much of an authority at all. "Beric heard the rumors first," he said. "Travelers from the northern roads talking about a woman who sang for the dying and left them living." He tracked the accounts back far enough to find a pattern. His eyes moved to her face with a directness she was becoming familiar with. "He was the one who arranged your hire. He told me you were worth the risk of including in the plan. And if I hadn't worked," Nell said, "if I'd arrived at that grave and nothing had happened, then I would have lost one useful piece of information and gained nothing. It was a measured risk." She looked at him steadily. She had met many men who said things like measured risk in the tone of someone reading from a prepared text. He said it the way he seemed to say most things, as though the words were simply true and required no decoration. "I won't be used as a tool," she said. "Not by you and not by anyone. If you want my help, those are the terms." "What are your terms?" "Freedom of movement. I go where I choose to go when I choose. No guards following me, no locked doors, no instructions delivered through intermediaries who don't introduce themselves." She paused. "And honesty. Whatever you know about what I am and what this is, you tell me directly. No managed information." He considered that for a moment. "One condition in return. Name it. You stay until Gorvin is contained. Whatever that requires, and however long it takes." She waited. It was not a small ask. But she had nowhere else to be that was pressing, and the man who had just climbed out of her professional understanding of the world was now sitting in a room a short distance away, having confirmed that something deliberate and serious had happened in that cemetery. Something she had caused without fully understanding how. She wanted answers as much as he did. "Agreed," she said. He extended his hand. She shook it with a grip that matched his, and he seemed faintly surprised by that, though he did not comment. They left Dunmore before the village woke. 3 of them, Idren, Nell, and a 4th guard Barrack had arranged before departing with Hadric on the northern route. The guard was a young man of few words who stayed several lengths behind and asked for nothing. The road north toward Ashvin ran through forest for the better part of 2 days, the canopy thick enough to muffle sound from the main thoroughfare. It was cold. The horses moved at a steady pace, and the silence was the comfortable kind that came not from absence but from restraint. Nell rode without difficulty. Her mother had kept a single horse for most of Nell's childhood, and the rhythm of travel was as familiar as anything she owned. She was aware of him. That was the part she could not account for. It wasn't attention. She had been watched before, and this was not that. It was something more internal. A pressure at the edge of her awareness, like a sound heard in an adjacent room, present enough to notice but not quite resolvable into meaning. When he moved ahead on the road, she felt the distance between them as a kind of mild discomfort. And when he fell back alongside her, the pressure eased. She told herself it was the strangeness of the situation. She was traveling with a man who was supposed to be dead toward an uncertain destination after having pulled another man out of the earth with her voice. Strange situations produced strange sensations. She noted it and kept it to herself. Edren was having a worse time of it. He was aware of her in a way that had nothing to do with his eyes. The wolf, diminished as it was, unsteady as the shift had become, was entirely clear on the subject of Nell. Her scent had registered the moment she walked into the cemetery, and it had not left him since. It sat in the back of his mind with a specificity that normal scent did not carry, as though it had been catalogued somewhere deeper than memory. Wood smoke and cold air and something underneath that he had no name for, something that the wolf treated not as data, but as fact. Twice on the first day's ride, he had moved his horse between hers and the tree line before he had consciously registered a sound in the undergrowth. Both times it was nothing. A deer, once, and once simply wind. Both times the instinct had moved before the thought, placing him between her and the unknown with a certainty that had nothing to do with planning. He recognized what it was. He had heard it described enough times by enough men and women who had gone through it to understand the shape of the thing even before he could name it plainly. He did not name it plainly. Not yet. The situation was complicated enough without adding that particular weight to it. They heard the riders on the second afternoon. The road had been quiet for hours. The forest here was dense, and the main thoroughfare lay a half-mile east, close enough to hear cartwheels on still air, but far enough to provide cover. The sound that reached them was wrong for a merchant train. Too fast, too purposeful, moving in a spread formation rather than a line. Idren raised his hand, and they stopped. He sat completely still, his head slightly tilted, and Nell watched him process information through senses she could not access. The guard behind them had gone still as well, hand resting on the hilt at his hip. 6 horses, Edren said quietly. Gorvin's livery, if they're carrying it. He looked at her. Someone was watching the cemetery after all. How far? Close enough that the main road is no longer an option. He moved without hurry, guiding his horse off the path and into the trees. The undergrowth was thick and the footing uncertain, and the light dropped sharply the moment they left the cleared road. Nell followed. Behind her, the guard was already pulling branches back across the path to obscure the marks in the mud. They rode in silence through the forest for the better part of an hour, picking a route by instinct and the occasional murmured direction from Idren, who seemed to read the terrain by something other than sight. The sound of the riders faded and then was gone. When they finally stopped to let the horses rest beside a narrow stream, Nell looked at him across the cold water and said, "That's twice today you moved before I understood why." He looked back at her with the careful expression she was starting to recognize as his version of deliberate composure. "I heard something in the trees. You heard it before I saw any sign of movement." She kept her voice even. "Both times." He said nothing for a moment. The stream ran past them, and the forest was very quiet. "Shifter senses," he said. Nothing more. It was not a lie exactly, but it was not the whole truth either, and they both understood that. Nell turned her horse back toward the path. "We should keep moving," she said. "Ashfin is still a day's ride." He fell in beside her without comment, close enough that the distance between them was no longer discomfort. She decided, for the moment, to let that stand. Ashfin announced itself before it came into view. The smell reached them first, wood smoke and tallow, and the particular sharpness of a trading post that never quite closed, where the same fires burned through every season and the same roads carried traffic in both directions without pause. Then the sound, low and constant, the kind of background noise that settlements of a certain size produce simply by existing. Then the outline of rooftops through the last stretch of trees, low and practical, built to last rather than impress. It was exactly the kind of place a man who was supposed to be dead would choose to disappear into. Edrin had been here before, years back, during a territorial dispute that had required his presence on the road rather than in a throne room. He remembered the layout, the central market square, the two inns that faced each other across it like old rivals, the road that split north and south at the well. More useful, he remembered the man who ran the larger of the two inns, an aging beta named Corvin, who had survived 4 different pack conflicts by the simple method of refusing to take sides in any of them. Corvin looked at Edrin in the doorway without visible surprise, looked at Nell behind him, and said, "I heard you were dead." "Rumors travel fast," Edrin said. "Not fast enough, apparently." He stood aside. "I have 2 rooms on the upper floor. The smaller one hasn't been rented in 3 weeks. We'll take both." They were given keys without further discussion. Corvin was, above all things, a practical man. The 4th guard did not follow them inside. He took the horses around back, listened to Edrin's brief instructions, and rode out again before the square filled, leaving only 2 travelers for Ashfin to notice. Beric arrived the following morning by the southern road. Hadric tucked into the back of a covered cart alongside a delivery of dry goods that Beric had arranged with enough lead time to make the cover convincing. He installed Hadric in a room at the second inn under a false name, left 2 men outside the door, and came directly to Edrin with a list of names. Lords who had been quietly contacted, lords who had agreed to travel to Ashfin, lords who had said nothing at all, which was its own kind of answer. 3 confirmed, Beric said, spreading the list on the table. 2 uncertain, 1 refusal, either genuine loyalty to Corvin or enough fear of him to amount to the same thing. Which one refused? Beric said the name. Edrin looked at the list and said nothing, which meant he had already suspected it. The meetings were held in the evenings, in Corvin's back room, 1 lord at a time. Edrin did not disguise himself for these. A man who had faked his own death to catch traitors could not afford ambiguity about whether he was truly alive when asking other men to stake their loyalty on the question. He sat at the table and let them look at him and waited for them to decide what they were going to do about it. All 3 who came made the same decision, though each arrived at it by a slightly different road. Nell was not present for any of these meetings. She had her own movements to attend to. The child was in the back room of a wool merchant's house on the east side of the market square. Nell had heard about it from the innkeeper's wife, a girl of 5 who had been feverish for 4 days and worsening in ways that the local healer could not explain. The family had tried every remedy available to them. Nell had not been asked, precisely, but the innkeeper's wife had a particular way of mentioning things that made the direction clear without requiring her to issue an actual request. Nell went that afternoon. The girl was small and very still in the bed, her breathing shallow, her skin holding a color that had no business being on a child's face. The mother stood at the foot of the bed with her hands folded the way people held their hands when they had run out of things to do with them. Nell sat on the edge of the mattress and began to sing. She had never been able to explain the mechanism of it, not to her mother, who had tried to teach it theoretically, not to herself, in years of traveling after. The song carried no words. It was not a spell in the sense she understood spells to work, with precise language and deliberate intention. It was something older and less organized than that, a frequency her voice found by instinct when something in a body had gone wrong that should not have, a kind of argument made in sound against a process that had no business being there. The girl's breathing changed within the hour. Color returned slowly, cautiously, the way light returned after a storm. Not sudden, but unmistakable once it began. By the time Nell left, the child was sleeping properly. The mother was pressing both of Nell's hands between her own, and the fever had broken entirely. Nell stood outside the merchant's house in the cold afternoon air and thought about the way it had felt. The resistance had been familiar. The same texture she had encountered her whole traveling life, bodies fighting processes they should not have been fighting, conditions that looked like illness but carried an intentionality that true sickness did not have. She had always attributed it to the randomness of the world, the arbitrary cruelty of disease. This time, she walked to the well instead of back to the inn. It took her most of the afternoon to confirm what she suspected. She spoke to 3 families around the market square, not intrusively, not with alarm, just the ordinary conversation of a traveler curious about a new place. 2 of the 3 had someone in the household who had been ill in the past month with something their healers had not been able to name. Both, when asked where they drew their daily water, pointed to the same stone well at the center of the square. She returned to the inn and found Adrin in the courtyard working through a set of measured movements she recognized, after a moment, as the kind of practice a man maintained to keep a body ready that his instincts could no longer fully access. She waited until he stopped. "The water," she said. "The well in the square." He turned. She told him what she had found. The child, the texture of the illness, the conversation with the families, the pattern that resolved itself once you had a framework for it. She told him about the quality of the resistance she had felt in the girl's blood when she sang, how it matched what she would expect if she were to sing over him. She was methodical about it, laying the information down in order, without embellishment. His expression shifted in a way she was learning to read, not visible emotion exactly, but a sharpening, a focus that narrowed inward before it moved outward toward action. "Gorvin," he said. "It follows," she said. "If you are dead and your authority is meant to be in question, destabilizing the pack territories on the frontier serves the same purpose. Make the lords here uncertain, make them dependent on whoever moves to fill the space." He was already walking back toward the inn. "I need to speak with Corvin, and the lords from last night." He stopped at the door without turning back. "You did well." It was simply said. She recognized with faint irritation that it landed more meaningfully than she would have preferred. He acted on it before dark. The well was closed and a notice posted, the contamination attributed to a fault in the surrounding ground. Close enough to true to hold, without requiring anyone to understand the rest of it yet. Alternative water was arranged from a northern source. 2 of the visiting lords agreed to send word to pack healers in their territories with information about the compound so other affected settlements could be found and treated. It was quietly done and thoroughly done, and Nell watched it move from a single piece of information to coordinated response in the span of an afternoon and understood that whatever else was complicated about the man who was not dead, he knew how to act on what he was given. That evening she knocked on his door. "Tell me what is happening to me," she said. He was at the small writing desk near the window, a candle burning. He looked at her for a moment, then set the pen down. "Sit down," he said. "I'd rather stand." He accepted that. He was quiet for a moment, as though arranging something. Then, "What have you noticed?" "I know where you are at all times, not as in I can see you, as in I'm aware of it, like a sound I cannot stop hearing." She kept her voice even. "It started on the road out of Dunmore. It has grown sharper every day since. I want to know what it is before it worsens further." He met her eyes and held them. "It's called a mate bond." She had heard the term before, the way one heard things about shifters when traveling through their territories long enough. She waited for him to continue. He explained it without decoration. A recognized pairing built into the wolf's understanding at a level below thought or choice. Not universal. Many shifters lived and died without encountering it, but when it occurred it was, by pack law and by the nature of the thing, irreversible. He had felt it at the cemetery, he told her, the moment she had spoken to him directly. The wolf had recognized her before his conscious mind had formed any opinion on the subject. "And you said nothing," she said. "There was a man just out of the ground at my feet and 6 riders somewhere in the dark. It was not the moment. There have been other moments since." "Yes," he said. "There have." The silence between them was not comfortable. Nell stood with her arms at her sides and felt the thing he had just named pull at her chest with the patience of something that had been present for some time and expected to remain. "I don't have a wolf," she said. "I cannot feel what you feel. You told me you know where I am without seeing me." She had no good answer to that. "I didn't agree to this," she said. The anger was real, but not directed at him precisely. It was the anger of a person who discovers their own body has been operating without consultation. "Whatever this is, I didn't choose it." "No," he said, "neither did I." The honesty of it settled in the room between them. "I want you to sing for me," he said after a moment. "Not tonight. I'm not asking that. But I want you to understand that I'm asking, and that it matters." "I know it matters," she said. "That's why the answer is not yet." She left before he could respond. She did not sleep well. Through the wall, she could hear the low murmur of voices, Edrin and Beric, still working long after the village had gone quiet. She was not trying to listen. The walls were simply not built for privacy. Most of it resolved into formless meeting noise, the sound of men working through a problem together, interrupting and revising. Then, clearly enough that she could not pretend otherwise, "The documents are already prepared," Beric said. "Gorvin has had them ready for months. If you surface publicly before we have evidence to counter them, he presents them to the assembled lords, and the argument becomes whether you murdered your father, not whether he poisoned you." A pause. "I know," Edrin said. "It's the thing most likely to fracture the lords still sitting on the fence. Not the poison. They can believe that came from an enemy. But if they believe you took the throne by killing him—" "I said I know." Another pause, longer than the first. "Then we move carefully," Beric said. The voices dropped after that. Nell lay in the dark, with her eyes open, and turned over the piece she had heard. Documents concerning how Edrin had come to power, that he had already known about, and had said nothing. She thought about the terms she had set on the road out of Dunmore. Honesty. "Whatever you know, you tell me directly." She thought about it for a long time before she finally slept. She left before the sky had any color in it. The lords had arrived late the previous evening, 2 of them riding hard from the Eastern Territories, and the meeting in Corvin's back room had stretched well past midnight with no sign of ending. Nell had heard the low rhythm of it through the floorboards, the kind of sustained exchange that meant an argument still in progress, positions being held and tested and revised. She had waited. The voices continued. At some point, she had made her decision and stopped waiting. She left a note for no one in particular, slid beneath the cup on the backroom table where Beric had left his maps. It said, "I have gone to confirm something. I will return with evidence or not at all." She considered adding more and decided that was sufficient. The stable boy did not ask questions. She had learned, over years of early departures from unfamiliar places, how to move through a sleeping building without creating memory. Coin helped. So did purpose, which had its own kind of gravity that most people stepped aside for instinctively. She was through the south gate before the bells marked the first hour. Veldrin was 2 days' ride on the main road. She took a parallel route, slower, less direct, but considerably less visible. The roads had been moving with Gorvin's men since Dunmore, or men she suspected were his, and she had no interest in being identified before she arrived anywhere useful. She thought about the conversation she had heard through the wall. Documents, Beric had said, prepared for months, a version of events concerning Edrin and his father, ready to be presented the moment Edrin surfaced publicly. Edrin had said he already knew. He had not said when he learned or why he had not considered it relevant to share with the woman he had bound to this situation on the terms of honesty. She was not reckless. She understood that she was traveling alone toward the home of a man who had already ordered one person buried alive in a cemetery. She carried a small knife in her boot. Her mother had taught her that. And she carried a better asset than the knife, which was the ability to move through a place without being remembered. 30 years her mother had traveled these territories as a professional mourner, and professional mourners were invisible in the precise way that people who handled death for a living become invisible. They were expected, they were unremarkable, and no one wanted to look at them long enough to note any distinguishing features. Nell had inherited this quality entirely. Gorvin's estate sat on the western edge of Veldren, behind a stone wall that had been built to suggest permanence and authority rather than actual security. The household ran a regular rotation of staff from the city: laundresses, kitchen workers, people who came and went on predictable schedules with predictable faces that the guards at the side entrance had stopped seeing individually years ago. She spent the first half of a day watching the rhythm of it from a distance before she found the right window. The laundry delivery came from a house on the North Lane. The woman who ran it was broad and tired and managed 4 girls who all wore the same gray wool. One of them was new, started within the month, not yet known by name to the gate guards. It cost Nell 2 conversations and a sum of coin she did not enjoy parting with. The girl got a day's unplanned rest, and Nell got a gray wool dress and a basket of folded linen to carry. She went through the side entrance at mid-morning without difficulty. The study was on the 2nd floor, east wing, overlooking a courtyard garden that had not been tended recently. She identified it through the simple process of moving through the house at the pace of someone who belonged there, noting which doors were guarded, which were locked, and which sat slightly open in the way of rooms where a person expected to return shortly. 1 guard at the study door. She did not engage him directly. She went down to the kitchens, established a presence there by unloading the linen basket and asking where it should go, and waited for the change of the midday shift. The guard rotation left the door unattended for 4 minutes. She counted them twice across 2 shift changes before she moved. The study smelled of old paper and tallow and the particular damp of a room where windows were rarely opened. Gorvin was, above all things, an organized man. The documents she was looking for were not hidden. They were filed, sorted, maintained with the careful attention of someone who expected to use them and wanted them immediately accessible. She found the forged account of Edrin's father's death inside a locked case that took her longer than she would have liked. The lock was good. Her patience was better. The papers were thorough. Dates, witnesses, a written account in what was presumably meant to resemble Edrin's hand. She could not verify that, but the attempt had clearly been made with care. It detailed a version of events in which the old king's illness had been accelerated, the timeline managed, and the timing arranged to benefit his son's accession. Presented before a hall of assembled lords with no counter-evidence available, it would be credible enough to fracture the uncertain ones. She was refiling the case when she found the second set. They were at the back of a separate drawer, tied with a plain cord, a dozen letters in a hand she did not recognize. She read the first one, and then the second, and then she understood what she was holding. Not Gorvin's correspondence to conspirators, correspondence received from one, a man who had been present the night the old king died, and had subsequently decided that this knowledge was worth ongoing payment. The letters spanned 4 years. The most recent one threatened to bring the information to the Western lords directly if the payments ceased. Gorvin had kept them. She supposed he had intended them as a weapon to hold against the man's future cooperation, without considering what would happen if someone else found them first. She folded both sets of documents into the inner lining of her gray dress, tucking them flat along the seam at her waist where the cloth was doubled. It wasn't perfect, but it would take more than a passing touch to find. She was a few paces from the side entrance when the hand closed around her arm. It was not rough, which was somehow worse. The man holding her was one she had not seen before. Not a guard in livery, but a man in plain clothes who had been standing inside the doorway with no purpose she could identify except waiting, which meant he had been waiting specifically. "Lord Gorvin would like to speak with you," the man said. She did not attempt to run. Running would have cost her the documents. At the doorway, they took the small knife from her boot and ran quick hands over her sleeves and hair, searching for anything obvious. No one touched the seam at her waist. The papers stayed pressed into the dress's lining, silent and inconveniently real. Gorvin was smaller in person than his reputation suggested. He sat behind a table in a receiving room she had not passed through on her way in. Not his study, somewhere more neutral, which told her he had already guessed she had been in the study and was choosing not to confirm it directly. He had the careful eyes of a man who had maintained a long lie by the sustained discipline of never saying anything that could be verified against him. He looked at her the way people looked at unexpected problems, assessing, categorizing, arriving at a conclusion before he had all the information. "The singer," he said. She said nothing. From Dunmore. There was a woman with a particular talent at the cemetery the night of the king's funeral. He studied her face with professional attention. "You're traveling without escorts, without anyone who knows you're here." He settled back in his chair. "That was a mistake." "People often think so," she said. His expression did not shift. "What did you find in my study?" "I wasn't in your study." "No," he said. "You were in my laundry, I'm sure. Please sit down." She sat because standing was no longer an option, and because giving ground on small things preserved room to hold on larger ones. She was thinking about the documents against her ribs, about the distance to the door, about the 4 minutes of rotation she had already spent and could not reuse. She did not know how long she sat there before she heard it. A sound from the entrance hall. Not the measured movement of the household, not guards at a routine post. Something faster than that, and quieter in a way that was itself a kind of sound. The silence of a thing moving at its own determined pace that had no interest in the ordinary traffic of the space. The bond in her chest tightened without warning, sudden and insistent like a hand closing around a thread. Then voices, sharp and brief. Then something that was not a voice. The door came open hard. The guard on the other side went sideways in a motion she could not fully follow. And Edrin stood in the doorway with amber eyes that were not entirely amber. Lit from within, with something that pressed against the boundaries of the face she had seen over 3 days on the road. The composed expression currently not quite composing. The line of jaw and forearm, showing at his cuffs something that resolved when she looked directly into the brief, wrong texture of a body insisting on being 2 things at once. His hands at the door frame, the knuckles. She registered it without meaning to. Gorvin had risen from his chair. Edrin looked at him once. A look she could not interpret precisely, but which landed visibly, because Gorvin's considerable composure fractured along a line she suspected he had hoped no one would find. And then Edrin crossed the room in 4 steps and said very quietly, near her ear, "Can you walk?" "Yes," she said. "Then walk fast." They went through the corridor and the service entrance and the gate at a pace she was actively working to maintain. And behind them she heard shouting and the sound of a chase organizing itself in the urgent, ungainly way of men who had not expected to need to run anywhere today. Edrin kept pace with her rather than ahead of her, which she noted without comment, and twice shifted his position without breaking stride to put himself between her and the sounds from behind. They reached the horses she had not thought to arrange. He had thought to arrange them. Outside the walls of Veldren, on a rutted track running northwest through stands of bare-limbed trees, they finally stopped. Nell sat with her hands in her lap and waited for her breathing to return to something ordinary. Edrin dismounted and moved away from her by a few paces, standing with his back to her for a moment that she recognized, retrospectively, as the moment he finished pressing something back into a shape that required effort to hold. When he turned around, his eyes were amber again. Only amber. His hands, at his sides, were unremarkable. She had seen what she had seen. "The documents," she said. She retrieved both sets from inside her dress and held them out. He took them and read in silence, standing on the track in the cold afternoon light, and she watched his face move through something that was not surprise, which confirmed what she had heard through the wall, and then settle into the expression of a man who had expected to be carrying a problem for a long time and has just been handed away to put it down. "The second set," she said. "He kept them to hold over the man who sent them. He didn't think far enough ahead." "No," Edrin said. "He didn't." She looked at him steadily. The doubt she had taken with her from Ashvin had dissolved somewhere between the second letter and the side entrance. The papers in her hands had done what 3 days of observation had not quite finished. Resolved the question of who he was against a standard that did not depend on her reading of his face. "You should have told me about the forged documents," she said. "We had terms." "Yes," he said. There was no deflection in it. "Don't omit things again." "I won't." She believed him. She was not entirely pleased that she believed him, but she had never found dishonesty with herself particularly useful. Behind them, the road back to Ashfen was empty and the sky was moving fast toward dark. Beric would be waiting, and Heydrich and the work of the next stage, which was considerably more complicated than this one had been. She took her reins back from the branch where he had tied them. "Then let's go," she said. They returned to Ashfen by a different road than the one they had left by. Beric met them at the stable before they had dismounted, taking the reins without comment and reading Idrin's face the way a man reads weather he has learned to respect. Quickly, practically, with a specific attention to what it meant for the next few hours rather than the next few days. Edrin handed him the documents. Beric looked at the second set for a long moment. "The extortion letters," Edrin said. "Gorvin kept them against the sender. They confirm the father's death in the sender's own hand. Names, dates, method. And Heydrich's testimony covers the rest." "It does." Beric refolded them and tucked them inside his coat with the careful attention of someone who understood what he was handling. He looked at Nell briefly, not assessing exactly, but acknowledging something. She gave him a small nod in return. "The lords are waiting," Beric said. 3 more arrived this afternoon. The ones who hadn't answered have answered now. "Which way?" "Yours." He allowed himself something that was not quite a smile. Turns out, a king who faked his own death to catch traitors and showed up alive with evidence reads differently than a king who simply refuses to die. They find it compelling. "How gratifying," Edrin said, and moved toward the inn. The preparations for the return to Veldrun took 3 days. Nell did not attend the Lord meetings, which was a deliberate choice on her part. She had no standing in those rooms and no interest in pretending otherwise. She spent the time walking the market, watching the well remain closed, watching the alternative water source move through the square in barrels, watching the child from the merchant's house appear in the doorway of the building 3 times with increasing color in her face. Small measurements. They were not unimportant. On the evening before departure, Edrin came to find her. She was sitting outside the inn on the low bench that ran along the front wall, watching the square empty itself for the night. He sat beside her without asking, which she had stopped finding presumptuous and had started finding simply characteristic. They sat in silence for a while. The village settled. Somewhere east, a dog barked twice and then stopped. "Tomorrow," he said. "Yes, when we arrive, if you choose to stand in that hall, you should understand what you're standing in." She looked at him. "Tell me." He told her plainly. The assembled lords, the claim he intended to make, the law it would invoke, the argument Gorvin would almost certainly use in response. He told her that her presence would be turned into a weapon against him if Gorvin found the angle, and that this was not a reason for her to stay away, but a reason for her to walk in knowing the full shape of the room. She listened without interrupting. "I'm not asking you to declare anything," he said. "I'm asking you to understand the room." "I understand the room," she said. "I've been reading rooms since I was 7 years old." She paused. "I'll be there." He looked at her for a moment. A direct look that was not the searching kind, not the assessing kind, but the kind that came after both of those things. When a person had already decided they trusted the answer and simply wanted to see it plainly one more time. "There's one more thing," he said. "Before tomorrow." She already knew what it was. The mate bond had been a sustained pressure in her chest for days, and she had made her peace with it gradually and without announcement, the way she made peace with most things, privately, thoroughly, and without reversing the decision afterward. "Yes," she said, before he had finished forming the request. It was before dawn. The inn was completely still. She sat on the low stool near the hearth in his borrowed room, and he sat on the floor with his back against the wall and his legs stretched out, and neither of them spoke. The candle on the table put out a small and steady light. The fire had burned down to coals that shifted occasionally with soft, collapsing sounds. Nell sang. Not the closing rite, not anything designed to guide the dead toward rest. Something older than that. The root of the song, the version her mother had sung before adding the words that made it serviceable and explainable. The version that was not a ritual, but the thing underneath rituals, the thing that rituals were attempts to reach. Her voice moved through the room, and she felt the resistance almost immediately. Different from the child in Ashfen, different from the man Hadric pulled from the ground. Less acute, more embedded, the kind of damage that had taken its time and had been taken for routine until it was structural. She found the edges of it and held the note that ran against the compound's logic and let the frequency do the work of argument. The mate bond, simultaneously, pulled at the space between them with a force she could no longer categorize as sensation rather than fact. It was simply real as the fire, as the floorboards, as the cold air coming in under the door. She stopped resisting it, and it settled into something that was not comfortable, precisely, but was no longer foreign. She watched him across the low light. Color returned to his face in the gradual, undeniable way of something reversing rather than beginning. The tension across his jaw and throat released, degree by degree, as the wolf settled back into its natural position rather than the diminished one the poison had forced on it. His breathing changed, deeper, slower, the sound of a body finding its proper capacity after a long time operating on less than it was made for. At some point, she felt the bond shift, not louder, but different, like a sound whose pitch had been subtly wrong for so long you didn't know it until it corrected. He felt it too. She saw it in his face, a brief opening, something crossing behind the amber eyes that she could not have described to anyone who had not also felt a memory surface unexpectedly. She finished the phrase she was on and let the note go. "There was a child," he said. His voice was quiet, undirected, the tone of someone recovering a thing from a distance. "When I was ill. The night I nearly didn't survive. There was a voice outside. I was certain I had imagined it, because my fever made everything uncertain. But I remembered it afterward. I always remembered it. A child singing to herself in the dark." Nell was still. She had been outside a palace wall, 7 years old, in the cold, waiting for her mother. She had hummed because she was restless, and because she always hummed when she was restless. She had thought nothing of it then or since. "Outside the east gate," she said. He looked at her. "My mother was working inside. I was waiting." She paused. "I was singing because I was bored, and my feet were cold, and there was no one to tell me to stop." He was quiet for a long moment. "You were there," he said. "I was there." He sat with that, with the particular weight of a thing that had always been true becoming known. She watched him turn it over in the careful internal way she had come to recognize, the way he processed things that mattered by giving them the full measure of their size. "The bond," he said finally. It recognized something it had encountered before. "It seems so," she said. She did not have a better explanation. She was not sure a better explanation was available. Some things, her mother had told her once, with the infuriating calm she deployed at maximum difficulty, are older than the reasoning we try to apply to them. Nell was inclined, on balance, to have believed her. They rode into Veldrin before midday with Beric on one side, Hadric in a covered cart behind, and 5 of the lords who had confirmed their positions riding in formation at a distance that was itself a statement. The city did not know how to react, which was the correct response to a thing it had not been given time to prepare an incorrect one for. The throne room assembled itself quickly. Word moved through stone halls the way it always did, faster than feet, faster than intent. Edrin walked in without ceremony, and the room went silent with the totality of a sound that had been cut at the source. The court looked at him. He stood at the front of the hall and let them look, the way he had done in Ashven with the lords, without concealment, without theater, simply present, simply alive. The argument that followed was long and technical, and involved several lords speaking at considerable length about things they had evidently been preparing to say for some time. Edrin let it run its course. When it had, he presented the forged documents and the extortion letters side by side, laid them on the table at the front of the hall where the assembled lords could examine them directly, and called Hadric to give his account. Hadric testified with the thoroughness of a man who had agreed to an arrangement and intended to honor it fully. He was not a compelling figure, tired, pale, still carrying the physical remnants of 4 days underground. But he was specific, and specificity in that room carried more weight than any amount of presentation. Dates, names, the merchant 3 territories removed, The compound and its sourcing, the conversation in which Gorvin had proposed the plan, and the subsequent conversations in which it had been refined. He left nothing useful out. Gorvin stood throughout with the composure of a man who had rehearsed for multiple versions of this moment. Nell, standing near the side wall where the light was less direct, watched him calculate in real time, reading the room's reaction to Hadrick's testimony, measuring which lords were convinced and which were still available to be argued with. He made his move when the testimony ended. "The documents are fabrications," he said, with enough measured conviction to make clear he was not rattled. "And the witness is a man found emerging from a cemetery by persons unknown, whose account cannot be independently verified by anyone present." He paused. What can be independently verified is that the Alpha King arrived in this hall in the company of a human woman, claimed under circumstances that this court was not consulted on, in apparent violation of the law that governs our governance of ourselves. He looked at Edren. "The law is plain. A king cannot hold authority over a shifter court if he is bound to one who carries no wolf. The court has a right to require him to choose." The room did not erupt. It shifted. A collective reorientation, the sound of people recalculating which question they were actually being asked to answer. Nell felt the bond pull tight in her chest. She did not look away from Gorvin. Edren stood at the front of the hall for a moment that extended past the comfortable length of moments. Then he shifted. It was not gradual. It was not a managed transition. The measured partial change she had seen at the estate, the controlled suppression of something that had been pushing against its constraints for weeks. This was complete and immediate and total, the full form of the wolf coming through him in a single motion that rearranged the air in the room. Where he had been standing, a wolf stood instead, larger than any she had a reference for, dark-coated, entirely still. Every shifter in the hall went still with it. She understood, watching their faces, that what they were experiencing was not simply visual. The wolf's presence moved through the room at a register below speech, below thought, at the level where pack recognition operated and hierarchy was not argued but felt. She was the only one present who did not feel it that way, and even she felt something. The bond pulling at her ribs with a force that was nearly physical, a directional certainty that resolved everything in the room down to a single point. The wolf turned. It turned toward her. Then Edren stood where the wolf had been, returned to himself with the same completeness the shift had carried, and the room held its collective breath. "The wolf chooses," he said. "I choose." He looked at Gorvin. "The law you have cited was written to protect the pack from those who would rule it without understanding it. I have spent my life in service of this court. The bond does not diminish that. It confirms it." He looked at the assembled lords. "You have felt the shift. You know what it means. The wolf is restored. The king stands before you. And the law cannot be invoked to override what every instinct in this room has just confirmed." The silence held for a long beat. Then, the lord to Gorvin's left stepped away from him. A small movement, an unmistakable one. Others followed, not all, but enough, and the ones who did not move simply stopped moving in Gorvin's direction. The sentencing was delivered before evening. Title, lands, pack. Confiscated in full, the transfer to be managed by Beric under Edren's direct authority. The Lord Hadrick had named was placed under guard before the hall emptied, his seal taken pending inquiry. Exile to the Northern Territories, a journey that would begin before dawn. No execution, no clemency either, which was a different thing. Gorvin would live with the full weight of what he had built and lost, in a territory where that history would follow him as long as he lasted. Edren named Beric, responsible for the purification of the water supplies in Ashvin and its neighboring territories. A public appointment, said plainly in front of the assembled court, with the weight that public recognition carried in a room full of people who understood the value of it. Beric stood straighter and said nothing, which was its own eloquence. Nell remained near the side wall while the formal business finished. The court began to move again, the particular motion of an institution resuming function after disruption, finding the shape of itself under new conditions. Several lords looked at her. She let them look. Edren crossed the hall toward her when the formal proceedings had closed. He did not hurry, but he moved with the directness of a man who had one specific thing left to do. "The court will contest it," she said when he reached her. "My position. Not today, not aloud, but they will find ways to raise it." "Yes," he said, "they will. And that doesn't concern you." "It concerns me," he said. "It doesn't change anything." She looked at him for a long moment. At the face she had first seen stepping out of cemetery shadow a couple of weeks ago, at the amber eyes that had never once looked away from a difficult thing to make it easier, at the man who had kept one secret and then had not kept another and had not tried to explain away the difference. She thought about her mother's bench outside the east gate, a 7-year-old humming to herself in the cold with no idea what she was doing or for whom, the thread of a thing that had apparently required 20 years of distance and a fake funeral to pull the two ends of it into the same room. "The bond is not something I chose," she said. "I know. But I'm choosing to stay." Outside the tall windows, the day was ending over Veldren, the light going slowly amber and then deeper. The court moved around them with its own purposes. Somewhere in the northern wing, Gorvin was being escorted to the rooms where he would spend the night before his exile. The wolf, she knew now, had always known where it was going. It had recognized the voice outside the wall before either of them had been old enough to understand what recognition meant. She was not sure she would have chosen this if the choice had been presented to her plainly before any of it began. She was sure she would not choose differently now.